And great. So hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines. I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. And on behalf of the Idaho Commission for Libraries and our funding partner, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, it's my pleasure to introduce these two Boise State University librarians, Rebecca and Amy. Amy is joining us on the phone today, so you will not see her lovely face, but she is here, and that is great. So take it away, you two.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie, for inviting us to present today. Let me just get everything situated. All right. So our presentation today is called A Library for Everyone, Building a Model for Library Digital Accessibility. And our hope with this presentation is twofold, I guess. One, we really wanted to give you an idea of our research study that we did last year and some of the lessons we learned about building digital library collections. And we ended up building sort of a model to help folks go from sort of the basics of we don't really have accessibility built into our plan to this is the steps you need to take in order to really take hold of accessibility in your library. And then also to give you some tips and tricks and tools that pretty much anyone can do. Like you don't have to be like the web developer, the web librarian. They're all easy things that you can do and little things that really help and really mean something to folks who, for whatever reason cannot participate fully with a standard maybe method of delivering content. So our agenda for today is first an introduction of myself and the lovely Amy. Then Amy's going to go ahead and present our research. We're going to give you a whole bunch of tips and tools. So, you'll have to get set for those. And then we'll do some questions at the end because there's always little bits and pieces that, you just don't cover for everyone in a talk like this. So introduction, on this page, you'll see a tab that says About Us as a label, and then you'll see two pictures. The first is of myself. My name is Rebecca Peacock. I'm a librarian here at Boise State University. I'm also an instructional designer, and universal design for learning is one of my areas of interest and passion. So I'm really excited to be sharing some of these tips and tricks and tools with you all today. All right, Amy.
And hi, I am Amy Vecchione, and I hope you can hear me okay. I am also an associate professor at Boise State University Albertsons Library, where I also serve as a unit head for emerging technologies and experiential learning. I won't be able to see the chat, but Rebecca can let us know. Can you hear us okay for both of us? And could you please just do a check to make sure that you can view the font and the font size is acceptable? And Rebecca, can you let me know if you need to pause?
Yep.
Are we okay?
So yeah, yep, people are saying yes, audio is great, font size is fine. Thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are going to share some of the research first, and that is that in 2019, we conducted a survey of academic libraries in our region. I want to talk a little bit about why it's important to reach out to folks in your region to learn about the policies and workflows. And it's because the policies and the support structures for those tend to be supported by regional decision making. So, for example, statewide policymakers, they may make statewide choices in the legislature or statewide committees. Every region is different, though. There are some places where there are citywide decisions, and then there's financial support there. There's different areas. Some are rural, urban, and everything in between. And our methodology was considering that those aspects are going to be unique to everyone. And so we were also borrowing a methodology from Idaho State University. Some of our colleagues had done a similar research method where they surveyed how academic libraries are incorporating information literacy in 4 credit-based learning courses. They did the same thing for the same reasons. And so they selected individuals, just like we did at academic libraries. And what we did following that we identified individuals in acquisitions and collections who make purchasing decisions. So then we reached out to them, asked them if they would participate in our survey. That way we could get targeted individuals who make decisions at their academic libraries and not ask folks that may or may not know the answers to the questions that we were asking. And they were also going to be pertinent to our region. So in that survey, we asked 19 different questions. 13 of those were on a like scale, and 6 were free response and allowed everybody to share their feedback. Overall, after considering everything that folks had shared with us, we noticed that the recognition of accessibility in our region was considered to be important, but many individuals had not yet taken those first steps and didn't know how to apply some of the principles that would help folks create accessible digital libraries. And that's our goal. That's what we want to do. Next slide. We found that there were 4 predominant themes about our research, and the first one being accessibility training. That is something that is necessary to raise awareness, but we found that most of the institutions in our region hadn't had widespread participation in accessibility training. Some folks had attended 1 or 2 trainings, but there had not been a systematic training, such as if entire departments or entire units all attended at the same time and then reflected on their workflows and then considered how to make better accessibility choices together. That's what we were looking for to see if that had happened. Secondly, regarding library video and streaming media, this was one of our biggest concerns because we found that most institutions were considering accessibility when they were purchasing video or streaming media, at least to some extent. And in regards to budget, and this is the really important one, it costs money to have things presented in multiple different formats. We found 70% of the institutions we polled indicated they had no budget to provide this kind of support in-house. And what that means is it's going to require libraries to carve funding out of other locations, taking money away from other initiatives and programs. And we don't want that. What we really want is for policymakers to be supporting accessibility, and that requires some advocacy. Last theme that we noticed was that library folks couldn't determine who was truly responsible for making materials accessible. Some institutions, most of them felt that the Campus Access Center, whatever that was called, was responsible for providing the accessibility, and it wasn't a library responsibility. Next slide, please. It took us quite a lot of time of reviewing these comments before we realized that our library peers and institutions fell into 4 different types of category of thought. And I'll just briefly explain what those are, and then I'll reflect a little bit more in depth. The 4 phases we saw for adopting accessible practices were initiating, considering, exploring, and adopting. And I don't know if you all want to share, you're more than welcome to in the chat, but we had found that many folks were at that initiating stage, and essentially we're hoping that folks can grow upwards in this model and reflect on their work and make accessibility improvements. So let's start with what each of these means and find your organization as we talk along this model of awareness so that you can think about it. You don't have to share it, it's not required, but consider where you think you all are. And you can use this model at your organization to advocate for better accessibility policies. So initiating is a phase where the library as a whole may not all be aware of accessibility needs and doesn't yet have the training to meet those needs. And that's the first step. So that part is great. If you're aware, maybe just considering that awareness, moving into considering. That's where we want to be. And that's where the library is researching actively accessibility needs, but is not aware of how to yet implement that as a change. So that may be when you found there's expertise, people have attended numerous trainings, they're talking about it amongst themselves or in groups or in pairs. People are starting to have better and more conversations about how to apply these techniques. That's considering. Exploring is going to be when your library as a whole has determined what needs you can meet and is actively conducting that systematic training and is actively looking for funding sources to help move accessibility practices along so that you're then getting to the final kind of stage, which is adopting. The library is establishing policies and securing funding and adopts a universal design for learning philosophy. And what I want to convey here is that everything changes and new technologies come about often, which allows us to make our materials more accessible over time. As a result, we are going to cycle back to initiating at times. And so adopting and finding funding for new accessible practices changes. And it's not a one and done, but as we continue to reflect and we become more aware, we do need to go back to that initiating stage where we realize, oh, that's a need. We need to change our practice with social media, for example, and then you switch to considering, and then you start to reconsider how to implement that change, and you go forward again. So we're recommending that this is the model that everybody can use. I hope you all find this helpful. All of the institutions that we polled fit into here to some extent in different places. And we think it's really important to recognize that continuity, that you may not be in a place of full adoption of accessibility practices currently, but by following some steps, you will get there. Okay, I just wanted to make sure you all can still see our screen and hear us okay, and make sure the font size is still okay as you're following along with us. And we're just gonna let you add that into the chat. Is everything going okay, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I wanted to read a comment from Robert who said that on the digital side, they are in the red and yellow areas, at least in some spots, but they're kind of just all over the place, which I think is pretty normal for most institutions, at least it is for ours.
Yes, definitely. And I think every single aspect of accessibility and the format of delivering the service that you're delivering, you may be at different places depending on what that service is. It may not be possible to do them all at once because we do have finite resources. And so, it's important to make sure you can focus on what you have in your control and go one step at a time. I think that's a great point, Robert. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that.
It doesn't look like we have any other questions at this time, but if you have a question, we'll do another round of questions at the end. And I think for now, we'll move into tips and tools.
Awesome.
Okay, so the first sort of tips and tricks that we wanted to talk about were links. And I think links are one of those things that most of us have some sort of control over, or at least can advocate for. Having good links really helps folks that have to use a screen reader, people who are keyboard only users, and link colors end up being super important when you have folks who maybe have some sort of color blindness or other low vision. So the first sort of tip is to avoid the quote unquote click here links. That doesn't tell somebody what the link is at all. It could be a link to anything, to anywhere. And so if a person especially is using a screen reader and they're trying to find a link to something specific on a web page, if they just hear click here, because that's what the screen reader will read, they will have no idea what it is they're clicking for. So avoid things like that. Also use really unique link names. And by this, I mean, let's say your library has like research guides or some other sort of standard, research help pages. And you have maybe like instructional videos that will explain the different database. Don't just put, instructional tutorial or instruction video as the link name, because those links are probably going to lead to different databases or different videos. So what you want to do with those is use a unique name. So it could be EBSCO instruction video or ProQuest instruction video. So you want to have those as unique names, especially if it's on the same page, because the screen reader is just going to read, instruction video, and it won't tell the person with the screen reader what exactly that link means. Also, try and avoid long link names. You can use kind of long names if you need to be a little bit descriptive. Like being descriptive in a link is fine, but don't make it go on and on and on and on, because the screen reader will literally read every single word. So descriptive enough to be helpful, but not necessarily, a paragraph's worth of link title. The other thing to avoid is using URLs as the link title. And so I have an example here, which is one of those weird Google document or Google slide links that has, all of the extra like letters and numbers like IDUV_VVG, Basically, if you use a link like that as the link title, the screen reader will read every single word, letter, /_. And so if you can imagine if someone was on a screen reader and they were having to listen to that entire link get played out multiple times potentially, that's not really great. The other thing is about color and underlines. And so I'll start with underlines maybe first. The standard best practice is to always include the underline with your links. And that's really important just because it shows that there's a differentiation in the text. And it also sort of helps, anybody reading a page understand, oh, this is an underline, this must be a link. And so it's a good visual cue to use, not just for folks who may be navigating your page with a screen reader or keyboard only or something like that, but it helps everybody understand. It's good format. But if you don't use an underline, at least use a color or some other indicator to show that this text, there's something different about it. Use the underline. It's just a best practice. The other thing with color comes in place when you think about folks who may have some sort of color blindness or low vision. You want to be very intentional when you pick colors for your website. And so if you have, like a beautiful Boise State orange website background, and then you have sort of a very similar orange as your text, you might have trouble differentiating them to those two different colors. In fact, another colleague of mine and I have been working on another accessibility project using colors, and we found that almost all of the American Research Library websites have some color contrast issues because they've used school branded colors in headers and footers, and the color contrast just isn't high enough to actually be accessible for folks with colorblind issues. And so the color is really, really important. It's best to have a whole lot of contrast between those two colors in order to differentiate those, and so people can see them well. And I'll give you a tool sort of at the end that'll help you with determining whether or not your colors are in good contrast. Okay, the next is documents, and this is probably something that we've all seen from time to time, and that's really trying to make your documents have good headings, have good structure, have good format. This not only helps screen readers, but this is also a universal design for learning best practice. The title headers help make a good structure of your document, and it helps folks who are just like trying to navigate through, understand where they are in the document. we're in academia, so I'll use like a journal article as an example, but say you're just trying to figure out what method the article used, and there were no headers, you would literally have to be like reading the entire article line by line, trying to figure out where that information might be. Whereas if you have good headers and a good organization of your document, oh, well, I can just, scroll right to the methods section and there I have it. And so it's really good to use those titles and headers. They're built-in features of, your Microsoft Office products, your Google products. And so use them. They're great and they're built in. Text size can also help. So that's kind of gives you a visual indicator of, oh, maybe this big thing is the most important. And then this smaller heading, maybe this is the, part of this bigger one. So it kind of gives you another good visual cue. For the web, always use those H hashtags. If you have any sort of responsibility that you can do for your website, or if you use an LMS, so a learning management system like Blackboard or Canvas, or if you use like LibGuides, make sure that, or other sort of guide software, make sure that you're using either their built-in headers or you're putting in your own HTML headers, and that does the same, gives them a visual cue, and that way the screen reader understands, okay, this is the content I read first, this is the content I read second, and on and on and on. So just good practices, and it's good to get in the habit so that everyone can have a good experience with your information or learning or writing or all of that. Okay, so the third tip and tricks is videos. And making videos accessible helps folks who have, low vision, helps people who have an auditory barrier, helps folks who have a language barrier, helps people with ADHD, ADD, and it's just another good universal design for learning best practice. In fact, the eCampus at Oregon State worked with 3Play Media, which is one of the big players in captioning. So you pay them a lot of money and they make captions for you. But they did a research project together, and they found that 71% of the students they polled use captions in lectures. So no matter if they need them or not, 71% of the students were using captions when they were watching video lectures. And then on top of that, 75% of those students indicated that the reason they were using the captions was to help them with studying. And then their number one reason that they sort of wrote out in their free response survey questions was that they used the captions because it was a benefit for their learning because it helped them focus. And so all of those reasons, it helps me study, it helps me focus. I'm using them whether or not I have an actual need for them. Just kind of shows that it's just a great universal design for learning practice. I like to consider like a movie that I love, which is Amélie. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a French film. It's beautiful. And the visuals in it are so like powerful that you can understand a lot of the movie from the visuals. However, it's in French. And so, if you didn't have the subtitles, you'd probably lose a little bit of what goes on, but not too much. But I like to think if I couldn't hear the movie at all, okay, good, I would have the captions. If I couldn't see the movie at all, oh man, I would have a really tough time because I don't speak French. And so that would be really difficult for me. You can also sort of think of, I think all students often have a case where a professor might be from another country and might either speak really fast or have a bit of an accent. And so that's another one of those UDL practices where having captions for videos is really, really helpful to everybody. So how do you do captions? There are lots of options. You can pay companies like 3Play Media, Rev to make captions for you. But YouTube does a really good job of their auto-gen captions these days. And if it's a video that you put up on their website, you can go through, you can fix the captions. They also have a feature where you can turn on community captions. And so if you have some library friends that can help you, you can all sort of caption the same thing together, and you as the creator have the final sort of approval, so you don't have to feel like something bad will happen. You can, you know, preview the captions, and so that's really nice. Our campus uses a video platform called Panopto, and Panopto also has auto-gen captions that are pretty good. And then like Kaltura, TechSmith, Relay, all of those companies do automatic captions, and they're really pretty good, and they all allow you to go in and tweak and fix everything. Sometimes when I say my last name on instructional videos, it doesn't catch Peacock at all, and so I always end up having to go fix my last name. So I'm gonna, in a second, I'm gonna show you some of these resources I have here, but the DCMP is an organization that helps with media and captions and audio description. So I'll show you that in a second. Audio description. So audio description is one of those things that's kind of like your top tier accessibility features. It's kind of like, if you want to be like the best accessibility online person possible, you will do audio descriptions. And audio description is exactly what it sounds like. It describes what is going on on the screen for someone who cannot see what's going on the screen. And I think back to my younger days and for examples of audio description, and PBS is the one that comes to mind. PBS did a really good job, or does a really good job, of things like audio description. And so they'll go in and you'll basically have someone sort of narrating what's going on the screen. And so I'll give you a key for that. And then so the problem with audio descriptions is most of the players that we have these days don't allow for that third audio track that you need in order to put an audio description in along with your normal video. Like YouTube doesn't allow it. Panopto is trying to get this added, but TechSmith Relay doesn't. It's one of those like really extra features that should be everywhere, but it's not yet. However, udescribe.org, which is a project from another grant-funded organization, allows you to suck in anything that's on YouTube that you have put in there, and you can do your own audio description within the udescribe platform. And so if you really want to be a great ally and be helpful to folks, you can also put stuff on YouTube and then use udescribe to create your descriptions. So I'm gonna just go out for a second. And let's see. Okay, so here's the caption key. There's a lot of rules, like grammar rules and punctuation rules, and how much text should you have in one slide type rules. And so this key gives you all of those things. It's amazing. I love it. So this is the one for captioning. And I think Amy's probably remembered to put the links in, since I think I'm forgetting. So you'll have that one. Here's the description key, and this does the same, but it teaches you how to do your audio descriptions, which requires some practice. I've done one or two, and they took a little longer than I anticipated, but it's a really good thing to kind of think about and do to help yourself understand what other folks will need. And then this is the udescribe website. And so these are videos that other people have put audio descriptions in. You just make your own account, and then you use this My Descriptions link here to add in videos and make your own descriptions. So it's a really, really cool tool. So I hope we eventually get to have this as sort of a standard feature on all of our media players. So I'm going to turn this back over to Amy now. Oops, sorry.
And I think Annie is putting the links in. I hope, I don't think I have the ability to see the chat. So
she got them.
I hope, great, okay, sweet. We're going to switch into images and discussing how images work with regards to visually impaired or blind, anyone experiencing blindness. It's important to remember, I think, that at any point in our lives, we could become disabled, and then there's also a transition point where you may not, again, be disabled. So sometimes these disabilities come in and out, And so it's important, on top of all the other great reasons that Rebecca just shared, to remember that sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it's a temporary, and all of these tools can help everybody that you're working with. And that's specifically true regarding images. So if an individual is experiencing blindness or is blind, then they cannot see any of the beautiful pictures that you may place either on your website, in your presentations, or in your social media accounts. And so what screen readers do, and if you've never used a screen reader before, we would recommend that you search for some and test it out because it will read everything that the screen is depicting. They read what's called alt text. I don't know how many of you are familiar with alt text, alternative text. So it's an alternative to visually viewing the image in front of you. I always like to look at alt text. I've been a fan of it for a long time in general. XKCD, the comic strip, always has a hidden joke. I don't know how many of you have seen that comic, but if you right click to view the alt text, there's always a hidden joke in that comic strip in the alt text that's a little bit different, but similar to what the comic is depicting. So when you include alternative text on your images, a screen reader will read that out loud to somebody that has that enabled. It will entirely skip over any image that doesn't have any coding. And in general, if you're using something like WordPress or Drupal to manage your website for your library, it's very easy to add the alt text tag when you're uploading the image. The best way to use an alt text tag is to describe what you can see in the image. And so doing your best to explain who is depicted, not names, but describing what the person looks like or what they're wearing, if it's important, and then describing what they are doing, that's a really important step. I included an example on my Twitter account just a few moments ago, and I believe Rebecca will be able to share her screen and show you how Twitter allows us to add an alternative tag or alternative text in when we add images in Twitter, and that makes Twitter more accessible. Are you going to be able to show us that, Rebecca?
Yep, I'm showing it right now. And so you can see there's a picture from my trip to Alaska, and right under here is where I can add my description.
And if I didn't know, let you all know before, if just so you all, for the record, my internet has gone out in my neighborhood, and so that's why I'm calling in. I normally would never ask Rebecca to be doing these kinds of tasks for me, and I just wanted to state that out loud so that you all understood. It seems like my internet went out at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, and so I just want to thank you all for your understanding and your patience. Okay, the other thing I want to add regarding Twitter, and this is not necessarily related to alt text, but I want to address that when you're using hashtags. So for today, if you're on Twitter, I included a hashtag on my Twitter account, libraries for everyone. And I capitalized the L, and I capitalized the F, and I capitalized the E. And that is called camel casing, and it allows your hashtags to be read properly by a screen reader. Otherwise, it will read #, and then it'll spell out the hashtag, and it's very confusing to folks. But if you capitalize the individual word, the beginnings of each word in a hashtag, it allows screen readers to be able to recognize it, and it makes your hashtags accessible to folks who are blind or visually impaired. So camel casing is incredibly important when you're considering how to make Twitter accessible, for example. I don't know how many of you knew about that. I'm sometimes really good about it, and sometimes I forget. Again, remember, it's a continuum, and it's something we want to strive to be able to do for everyone. And now we're going to talk about live presentations. Just like we have done today, we have stopped a few times to make sure that our text and audio can be seen by everyone. And then we're also explaining the screen. I think that in the past, folks have have thought that it's best to just have beautiful images in your presentation on your slides, and then you just tell people everything that you wanted to tell them. And then sometimes the things that you say are sort of tangentially related to the picture, but in reality, a best practice is to include what you're trying to say on your slide, and then also read the slide. And then that way people can hear what you're saying and read what you're saying at the same time. And that helps make things accessible in a different way. In full spirit of that, it's important to make it a habit. I'm trying extra hard in this presentation to speak loudly and clearly and use an external microphone. However, I have had interesting technical difficulties today, and so I am not following this best practice. But normally you would also want to use an external microphone for your presentation and avoid using the native microphone to whatever device you're using. Always making sure to speak loudly and clearly, and again, pausing to ensure that you still are, that folks still can hear you. Even if everybody says yes, it's always important to keep checking in, because it allows for people to speak up, especially if something may have changed. Okay, I kind of went over explain the screen. Just like I'm doing, you always want to read what the words are that are on the screen as well. And then this is important. If you're ever presenting where there are some people live in person and there are some people that are remote, a lot of times the folks that are living in the remote participation kind of fall by the wayside and people forget about them, and the people that are in person get the priority of the presentation. If you're going to present in two worlds, you always want to check back and facilitate the discussion and acknowledge the digital comments, just like Rebecca did earlier. So pausing and stopping to take questions or reading what comments are being made in a chat is really important. Always acknowledging what the people online are saying, especially if you're presenting in real life. That hybrid model is going to become incredibly important as we continue to try to live through the current crises we're facing, because we will have some hybrid models of programming. And so keeping track of that is important. One more thing I want to share on this note is that there's this idea that cognitive load, if you put less on the slide, that helps people. So as they're going through and learning new information, but that's a personal choice. You can put as much information or as little as you'd like. But whatever you do put on your slide, you would want to read. Are we ready to move on to the next slide? All right. Our sixth tip and trick is on Google Slides Present. And this is for when you're doing live presentations, just like right now. And I don't know how many of you have played with this, but in Google Slides and in Google Meet, you can select a feature called automatic transcription. What it will do is transcribe the words that you're saying, and I have found it to be accurate most of the time. I think it's fantastic for meetings. So if you just go into Google Slides and you click Present, you can check a box that allows you to transcribe whatever you're saying as you're presenting to a large audience. And you can also do that in Google Meet, so that as you're meeting with someone, everything that you're saying or that they're saying one-on-one will appear at the bottom of the screen. It provides closed captioning as the individual speaks. I also know that in Google Docs, if you click under Tools, there's something called voice typing. It would allow you, as you're speaking, to take notes on everything that you're seeing in front of you. It sometimes may work, depending on how your microphone is set up for meetings, so that you could take notes actively by having it transcribe everything that folks say. But this is going to become incredibly important. The pandemic has definitely highlighted accessibility issues in our workplace and our work environments. And it's allowing us this great opportunity to learn a lot more new tools, evaluate them, and learn how to really apply them to make our libraries as accessible as possible for everyone.
Amy, I'm going to unmute real quick to demonstrate the live captioning. So everyone should be able to see the white captioning now appearing below the screen. And you'll notice that it is captioning me, but it did not caption Amy. That's because it has to be connected to the microphone of the person who's sharing the presentation. So that's something to also keep in mind for the future, that if you're going to be captioning, make sure who's ever talking is the person sharing. You'll also know, and I think we had someone note it in the chat earlier, that it takes the slides out of full presentation mode and squishes them down a little, and that's to give that space below for the captioning to appear. Sorry, Amy.
No, I'm so glad you said thank you we had talked about it. I'm glad you included that. No sorries. Before we move into some of those specific tools, Rebecca, I just wanted to share the place where I've learned about this the most is a website called EASI, EASI.cc, and it stands for Equal Access to Software and Information. And they've put out a ton of webinars and courses over the years, and it's an all-volunteer organization, and the main person that was running it is unable to continue to support it. But many of their webinars are still available. If you do want to do some deep digging, you can look on their website. There's some things that are obvious, like Chromebook accessibility. If you want, that's where I've learned a lot of these technology tools. And Rebecca, I think we're ready to move on to the tools part.
Great. We have 2 questions, but I'm going to go ahead and leave them for the end, but I do see them and we will answer them. Okay, so tools. I think tools are always the most exciting part because this is where you can get some help with all of these different things. And who does love resources? At least I do. I mean, librarians, we love things like this. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the WebAIM website. I'm going to show you the Funkify simulator, which helps simulate different accessibility problems that folks might face when coming to your website or interacting with your videos or tutorials or all of that. We're going to talk about the Office accessibility checker and something called Grackle for Google Docs. And also, I'm going to show you the Ally Resources website, which has so many good things in addition to the one that Amy just said. And Amy, maybe we can get you to say that one more time so we can put it in the chat.
Yes, EASI.cc. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to jump out of Google Slides and we'll go take a look at some things. Okay, so WebAIM, you may have heard of WCAG before, and WCAG is the Web Accessibility Content Standards. And they're kind of like the universal, this is what you need to do, this is how you basic accessibility criteria. There are 3 different levels in WCAG, and so if you've never looked over those, you might want to. So there's a sort of a you have to do this level, which is A. Then there's a you really need to do, you ought to do this as well, which is AA. And AA, it's kind of like this is what you ought to do, but it's become kind of like, no, this is also what you need to do or else you're not meeting standards. And then there's AAA, which AAA is where audio description currently lives. And AAA is just sort of that, oh, this is, you're the best accessibility person out there. Like, these are all of the things you really do need to have to make everything completely accessible for everyone. And so it's kind of, it's good to understand those different levels when you're thinking about digital accessibility in particular. But this website has all sorts of good things to help you. And so the thing I wanted to point out was this color contrast checker here. And the color contrast checker, you can put in any combination of hex codes in these 2 boxes, and it'll tell you whether or not you are passing at a AA level or a AAA level. And so this is the website actually my colleague and I have been using for our research study. And so it's been very fascinating to see what does and does not pass. So I encourage you to do that when you're thinking about using color on your website or different colors. Wave is their accessibility evaluation tool. And so you can download this tool and run it on your website. And it's a nice sort of quick way of going, uh-oh, I've got some issues here. Some of the issues are pretty self-explanatory, like it'll say, you know, you've got a color contrast issue, or you'll have, you know, like a redundant link. And some of them get a little bit really specific. And so if you have like a web developer in your library and you take a look at your website, those might be issues to send on to them, because some of them require the back-end coding knowledge stuff. So that's WebAIM. Lots of good resources. Totally encourage you to go check them out. And they have some other different simulation things here. So those are great. Funkify is a browser plugin that also does some different simulations, which is very fun. You can use a couple of these as like in their free account, and then they have some additional ones that are in their paid account. So lots of things that you can do. The trembling one, I think I'm not going to turn it on because it makes you like kind of lose control of your mouse. But the trembling one is really, really helpful to kind of get an idea of how it feels when you cannot use your mouse to navigate things. And so it teaches you that sometimes you can't put things so close together or so tight, because if you're trembling, you really have a hard time clicking on things. And so it helps with those, understanding those sort of design decisions. And then it also has a color blindness checker. So very cool, very helpful. Microsoft products all have an accessibility checker put in. Annie is putting in the link to that, so you have all of that information, but it will just guide you through how the accessibility checker works. It's really nice. It gives you sort of a step-by-step, here's what your issues are, here's how you fix them. Very, very helpful. So I really encourage you, after you've made documents or presentations, to go through and take a look at any of those accessibility issues and fix them. Grackle is a sort of add-on for Google Suite items, and unfortunately it's a paid service, but you can do sort of like a month here and there if you want, and they have education subscriptions. Boise State happens to have a license to Grackle right now, and so we've been really enjoying using it. And I'll show you. We've got some issues on this particular presentation, because we downloaded a template from the internet, and it didn't have its settings quite right for titles. And so we've got errors in the title. So I'll show you kind of what that looks like. And so over here on the right side of your screen, I've opened up Grackle, and you'll see 14 out of the 16 checks have passed. Yay. It reminds you all of the different things that you need to do. And then it'll tell you, uh-oh, a slide should have a title. And so when you click on that, you'll see all of these slides have a title error. And so that's something we would need to go back and fix. For presentation purposes, I did leave it here for you. So, and then you'll see all of these other sort of elements to check on. There's a list that needs to be broken. And so if I click on this link, it'll take me right to that issue. And so it's this particular list which seems to be giving an issue. So Grackle is super duper amazing. I really, really like it, and it's easy to use. So, okay. I think we will go ahead now and do questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions was about what external mic to use for doing presentations. And so I can show you what mic I use, but it's probably a bit higher end than you would need to use. I use it for instructional videos, but I have a Blue Yeti external mic, and so it just plugs in USB. It's really it's nice, but it's probably a bit higher end than what you need. I think a lot of the just external headphone microphone things work just fine. So what else do you have on that, Amy?
I love the Blue Yeti, and if your library is willing to support it, I would recommend getting one that can be shared with folks so that you can, see how much you all might use it. And because it has that ability, if you're going to meet with people in a group and record that conversation, you can set it to be omnidirectional, and then it would capture everybody's voices equally, which I think is pretty valuable. And yes, other than that, using the native microphone, a lot of folks do it, and it's for the most part fine, but it always introduces a little bit of an external kind of static sound. And so I know I'm not doing that great today, but you always want to try to use an external mic to whatever device you're using, because the native mics they're not the best. They just don't add them the best. So that's the only thing I would add, but I love the Blue Yeti so much.
Cheyenne, can you let me know if that answered your question as well? And we'll do another one while you respond to that. So we had another comment that folks have been taught not to read what's on their screen in a presentation, but to go ahead and summarize it or explain it maybe in different words. So the question is it best for accessibility to actually read verbatim the exact words that are on your slide? And I'll let Amy go ahead and tackle that since she talked about that section.
I think a mix is great as long as you read the words that are on the slide while you're talking. You can add additional information between those words. I occasionally did it that way, and then I occasionally read them out of order. It's probably best to read them in order and intersperse additional material between each line. That's partly why we kept things in a brief bullet point list this way, though I didn't read it exactly verbatim as we hit the screen. So adding more is good, but reading what you do have is also helpful. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure if it does or if it adds muddiness. Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a good argument for keeping your slides informative and yet brief, rather than trying, you still, like cognitive load, you still wouldn't want to put an entire paragraph on your slide, because then the text would get really small. And then so I think some of those same things apply, but if you're going to put stuff on your slide, yes, I agree, you should read it. Do we have any other questions? Thank you, Annie, so much for putting in all the links for us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Annie and Rebecca, for all of your help and support. Could I add one thing, which is that if you all want to continue having more conversations or more questions, just so that you know we're available, and if you're watching this webinar even after we have presented it live, there's lots of ways to get in touch with us, and we are recommending the hashtag library for everyone, where the L, the F, and the E are capitalized. But also, if you want to look at other accessibility tweets that are out there, hashtag capital A11Y, ally, is a really important hashtag to pay attention to, so that you can learn more about what other folks are saying about what's accessible or what's not, and learning additional best practices. I like to think of Twitter as the place where tacit knowledge gets created before we codify it. And so I learn a lot by paying attention to that hashtag. And I know I've talked about Twitter a bunch, but it seems like it has some of the best accessibility functions out of any other social media. Did we get any questions while I just talked about that at all? Or do you have any more to say about that, Rebecca?
No, I did just want to remind folks that I have gone to the slide now with our contact information. My email is RebecaPeacock@boisestate.edu, and my Twitter handle is @RebecaPeacock. Amy's email is amyvecchione@boisestate.edu, and her Twitter handle is @Amy_Vecchione. And as Amy said, we're always happy to answer questions. I have several friends that are in the actual like web development side of accessibility. And so even if it's not a question that I feel comfortable asking, I'm happy to send it on to one of those folks. And then Amy, do you want to talk about Library Federation project that you're working on?
Oh, I would love to. There's an international service organization you may be familiar with called the Digital Library Federation, and we have a working group on accessibility in digital libraries. I'm participating on the committee as a co-lead to help create a toolkit for policies and workflows for all library, museum type organizations. And so the goal is that at the end of our work, we will have a set of best practices and tools in the form of a book that is going to help anyone in any library be able to pick up and create accessibility programs throughout the library and sustain them. And so we've been meeting for almost exactly a year, which is very interesting because it's been a very interesting year, but we are in the draft stages right now. I would also want to direct you that same working group, though I was not a lead on this, I helped participate, they're going to be putting on there's a forum, it takes place in November, and there's going to be a lot of accessibility presentations there as well. The DLF forum is free this year, and it's online. And so there's also accessibility practices for the forum, and I would encourage you to go ahead and check that out because it should be highly instructive as to how to go about doing accessibility in your library and help you learn more and find a community of people that are in a similar place to you. Honestly, for me, the community of people that are learning alongside me is incredibly important. I just want to reiterate, reach out to us anytime.
Awesome. This is Annie. I've switched to the phone because I'm having internet problems. I feel like it's really a Monday. But thank you guys so much. This was such an excellent and thorough presentation. I feel like we've learned a whole lot today. And I am so thankful for both of you for your willingness to share your expertise with us. And I think this is going to be a really good conversation starter for a lot of other libraries to get going on this.
I appreciate your time. Thanks for inviting us, Annie, and thanks to you for everybody who attended and is learning alongside us. Thank you.